For nearly 80 years, the United States dollar has been the dominant currency in global trade. But now, things are changing. Recent events, such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the resulting US-led sanctions, have prompted many countries to reconsider their reliance on the dollar. Countries like Russia and China, who are rivals of the US, have started promoting their own financial systems as alternatives to the dollar. And it's not just them. Countries across the globe, from India to Brazil to Southeast Asia, are also working to reduce their dependence on the dollar. They fear that the US might use its currency as a weapon, imposing sanctions on them like it did with Russia. For instance, China and Brazil has signed agreements to drop the US dollar and use RMB for bilateral trade. More than $150 billion in annual trade will now be settled in the respective currencies. Besides China and Brazil, ASEAN countries in the Southeast Asia region have also committed to settle trade in their respective currencies, dropping US dollar, euro, and yen. Indonesia also calls for phasing out Visa and MasterCard as a step to strengthen local currencies and become less reliant on the dollar. The big question is, can these efforts actually dethrone the dollar as the top currency in global trade? The dollar has long been considered the king, but now its dominance is being challenged like never before. Well, here's the short answer. The dollar's position as the leading currency in international trade is expected to remain unchallenged in the near future. There is currently no other currency that comes close to replacing it. However, there is a possibility that the dollar's grip on the global financial system could loosen if more countries begin trading in alternative currencies and decrease their reliance on the dollar. How the US dollar became the king. Prior to entering the war, the United States played a crucial role as the primary supplier of weapons and goods to the Allies. Most countries paid for these supplies with gold, resulting in the United States amassing a significant portion of the world's gold reserves by the war's end. However, due to the depletion of their own gold reserves, many countries found it impossible to return to the gold standard. In 1944, representatives from 44 Allied countries gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to devise a system that would manage foreign exchange without disadvantaging any nation. The delegates agreed that instead of linking currencies directly to gold, they would be pegged to the United States dollar. This arrangement was possible because the US dollar itself was tied to gold. Although the Bretton Woods system collapsed in the 1970s, the dollar's dominance continued. The US had a strong financial market, transparent governance norms, and a stable currency, solidifying its position. While countries were no longer required to fix their currencies to the dollar, it remained the go-to reserve currency. And that was how the US dollar became the world's reserve currencies. Currently, about 60% of global central banks' foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars, down from around 70% in 2000. However, experts note a gradual shift in the global financial order. The euro's share has seen a slight increase, while the Chinese renminbi has experienced significant growth since 2016, even though it represents less than 3% of global reserves. The de-dollarization begun. The move for countries to de-dollarize largely due to the US sanctions on Russia. The recent sanctions imposed by the United States, which froze half of Russia's reserves and restricted Russian banks from using the SWIFT system for transactions, have caused significant concern among numerous countries. Countries like China, who have already faced US sanctions, particularly in areas like semiconductor trade, are increasingly anxious about the possibility of similar measures being applied against them in the future. They fear that such actions could have a profound impact on the overall functioning of their economies. China has been reducing its holdings of US Treasury bonds, a common tool for countries to hold dollar reserves. Currently, China holds $870 billion in US debt, the lowest amount since 2010. Additionally, China has been engaging in negotiations with other countries to conduct trade using its own currency, the yuan. On the other hand, Iraq's central bank, a significant oil supplier, announced that trade with China could be settled in yuan for the first time. Bangladesh's central bank also made a similar announcement after that. Moreover, members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, led by China and including countries like Russia, India, and Pakistan, agreed to increase trade using their local currencies. Furthermore, China and Saudi Arabia conducted their first transaction in yuan in late last year. Russia has also made a decision to store all its surplus revenue from oil and gas in yuan in 2023, demonstrating an increasing reliance on the Chinese currency for its foreign exchange reserves. It is important to note that countries are seeking alternatives to the dollar not only due to sanctions but also due to the potential risks associated with heavy dependence on the US currency. The rising value of the dollar has also prompted countries to explore alternatives. Dollar-denominated debts have become more expensive to repay, as the currency has appreciated by more than 10% since the start of the Ukraine war in 2022 and by 30% in the past decade. This increase in the value of the dollar significantly impacts countries that heavily rely on imports of essential commodities, such as fuel and food, as it raises their import bills. When US interest rates rise and the dollar strengthens, it often leads to a wider exchange rate gap between developing nations and the United States. Consequently, the dollar-denominated debt owed by these developing nations grows and becomes difficult to manage and repay. As a result, it is not just China and Russia that are seeking to reduce their exposure to the dollar. Numerous nations, including close allies of the US, are actively exploring alternatives in order to diversify their holdings and mitigate potential risks. Marching towards a multipolar world. In the past 25 years, developing countries have tried to accumulate large reserves of foreign currency, mainly in US dollars, to protect themselves during global financial crises. These reserves are typically invested in US Treasury bonds and held within the US financial system. However, recent US sanctions on Russia have shown that these reserves, investments, and bank deposits are not guaranteed. If a country falls out of favor with the United States or supports a sanctioned nation, its access to these assets can be restricted. This uncertainty damages trust and changes the relationship. To be on the safe side, countries prefer to reduce their reliance on the US dollar, US government debt, and the US financial system as a whole. They look for alternatives to protect themselves and minimize potential risks. The renminbi, or yuan, is currently the only currency with the potential to replace the US dollar in the long run. However, for this to happen, the currency must achieve full convertibility, which is unlikely to occur anytime soon. Full convertibility means that the currency can be freely exchanged into other currencies for all purposes, including financial markets, trade, and global foreign exchange markets. Currently, the yuan is only convertible for specific purposes like trade, which limits its attractiveness despite China's growing influence on the global economy. The US dollar still holds significant power, but competition with other currencies is growing. This competition is expected to increase, especially as rising economic powers like China and the BRICS countries gain influence in their regions. The BRICS alliance, consisting of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is actively searching for an alternative to the US dollar. If they reach an agreement, it could speed up the global movement away from the dollar. These 5 nations are home to around 41% of the world's population, with mostly developing economies. Collectively, they account for 16% of global trade. Additionally, the combined GDP of these 5 nations makes up nearly 31.5% of the global GDP, slightly surpassing the 30.7% contributed by the G7 countries. Apart from that, there are more than 30 other countries expressing their interest to join BRICS. And the most shocking of all is that France's President, Emmanuel Macron, said that he would love to become the first Western leader to be invited to the BRICS summit, which will be held in August this year in South Africa. This news has sent shockwave across Europe, especially the United States. Can you imagine what will happen if those 30 countries and France joined BRICS? The process of de-dollarization will accelerate at an unimaginable rate. Although dethroning the dollar won't happen suddenly, it would be a gradual process over time. The dollar may not be dethroned in the short term, but it is losing its grip as the world's reserve currency. Do you think the US dollar will continue to dominate, or do you think other currency like China's yuan will rise? Share your thoughts and leave your comments below. If you like what you watch, hit the like button to show your support. More importantly, subscribe to this channel so that you will receive more interesting videos about Asia. Thank you for watching.